My name is Brad Henderson. I'm pastor here at Trinity Baptist Church in Walla Walla, and I just finished my 20th year anniversary here. We came out here as a family of 4, my wife Lisa and I, and 2 kids back in 1993, and here we are 20 years later. We have a big family, 7 kids, several of them are adopted, and then several biological kids. So really what we feel like we have is we have 2 families. We have our home family and we have our church family, and that's pretty much what I do. I do either one family or the other. That's what I'm doing with my time, and I'm thankful for that, and it's been a blessing and a privilege both to watch what's happened in my family and the things that God had in mind there with our children, and then also here at Trinity, the things that God has been doing here. And as a church, we've had a vision for a long time to have as much impact as we can have in our valley. Our valley is about 50,000 people, and that includes Walla Walla and some of the nearby towns. 50,000 people, and that's a lot of people. And about 56% of those are unaffiliated with any kind of faith, and those who are affiliated with the faith are the 3 most predominant affiliations are not places where it's very easy to hear the gospel. And so there's a real need in these 50,000, among these 50,000 people, and people come to Walla Walla and they say there are a lot of churches here, you know, and they drive around and they see church buildings, and you know, that's true. There are a lot of church buildings here. There aren't a lot of healthy gospel-centered churches. There just aren't. And so as a church, we knew that this was our vineyard, you know, and our responsibility, and so we have been doing our best to reach this valley. And a couple years ago we did something we'd never done before, and we broke the city up into little half-mile square quadrants where you walk one of those and you walk 2 miles around a neighborhood. And we had 44 of those different sections, different neighborhoods in town, and we prayer walked every single one of those one summer and prayed for the homes as we were walking by, and the families were there, and the schools and the businesses, and we prayed for the advance of the gospel, and we prayed for open hearts, and we prayed for our church to be able to have impact and be able to reach people. And not always able to say exactly what happens when we pray, you know, you can't always draw a direct line, but we saw 2 things happen as a result of that summer, praying that summer for Walla Walla. One of those was the introduction of a Spanish language pastor, Pastor Edgar Gonzalez, who's now here. God did that, I believe, in response to our prayers that summer for this city. And the other thing God did is God introduced us to Brian Hope.
My name is Brian Hope, lead pastor and planter of Mission Church here in Walla Walla. A little bit of our story. My wife and I, Elisa, we've been married for almost 22 years. We have 3 teenagers. We moved from Kent, Washington, where we had lived for 10 years, and in the Puget Sound area for the last 20 years or so. We moved to Walla Walla last June 2012 to begin and plant Mission Church here in Walla Walla. We were a little bit caught by surprise by God's call to come here. We've traveled here before, been to Walla Walla. We've each got some family history in this area, but didn't really see that much in the radar. But God just brought it in close. And one of the things that became a strong confirmation of His call here was the welcome that we received. We made a trip here in February 2012 just to see the place, just to have eyes on, bring our kids, see what they thought, with no real intention of this is where we were going to move. And I had set up a few meetings, one of which was with Pastor Brad Henderson of Trinity, just to ask the question, what do you think of an Acts 29 church plant here in Walla Walla? Now, I'd been a part of the network Acts 29 for a while, and I'd been in ministry, and I'd been in church planting, and I fully anticipated from all the pastors I had set up meetings with to get a rather suspicious, cynical, yet friendly response of, well, that's fine if that's what you want to do, but whatever. And I was really blown away when I sat down with Pastor Brad at Starbucks and just put that question out there, and he just leaned over and looked right at me and said, "I think that's a great idea." And I picked my jaw up off the table, and we just kept talking about his vision and Trinity's vision and desire to see the gospel really permeate this valley more than it has for a really long time.
Here we are, we're praying as a church for the advance of the gospel, and we feel like there's a lot of impact that needs to be had, and we want to multiply ourselves as a church, and here comes someone with a vision for the gospel that wants to do the same thing. And so as we began to talk and get to know each other a little bit, I began to see how God could really use what Brian wanted to bring to Walla Walla.
That conversation was huge in God confirming us, bringing us here to Walla Walla to Plant Mission Church. And it really set up a relationship that I have looked back on over the last almost 12 months, been thankful for every time I think about it, and have even tried to champion within the Acts 29 network and anybody else, whether they are a local church or somebody who's planting a church, that you need to find this kind of relationship. We've titled it kind of a host church. Not a church that is sending us someplace, nor a church that is funding the whole endeavor, but a local church that has a lot of local credibility that can get behind what we're doing and in a sense just put their arm around us and say, we're for this.
We're happy that Brian and his family are here, and thrilled about Mission Church, and they're beginning to emerge as a gospel influence in Walla Walla. We're happy about that, and we support Brian at the level of our missionaries, and because he's our missionary to Walla Walla. And I love Brian. He's a colleague and a friend, and we're happy to see Mission Church move forward, and that's what we want, because we got a big vineyard here and we're only working part of it. And Jesus said, pray for harvest hands, because there's a lot of work to do. That's how we feel about what we're doing here, and we're glad to have Brian and Mission Church be part of that, because they're reaching people that we won't be able to reach, and it needs all of us bringing what we have to advance the gospel. And so we're happy to be partnering with Brian and Mission Church in that way.
The reality for anybody who's in ministry, and it needs to be reckoned with, is you won't lead the silver bullet church that that hits everybody, does everything right, sort of the end all of everything. And I think that's the myth that a lot of guys chase, and a lot of the churches kind of go after that and hope that they'll be finally that absolute final church.
You want to think you're going to be the guy that's going to change the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. You know, and there's nothing wrong with shooting for that, but you know, I've been here long enough to know my limitations and to know that's not reality.
Right.
And that, you got to be real, and you got to know you're not the silver bullet.
And I mean, I'd liken it to kind of a baseball field of realizing there's a lot of field to cover, and Mission Church wants to come here and cover part of that field that hasn't been covered, and not to run over and say, okay, Trinity or First Press or Blue Mountain or whatever, and say, well, let me just play the only outfielder and the infield at the same time. That would just be arrogant and foolish, and it would really make the game rather lopsided against us.
It's kind of the flip side of the same idea, silver bullet. You know, Trinity's not going to be the silver bullet for the Walla Walla Valley. We're going to be one of the churches that God's going to use, and we need to shoot for everything. We need to aspire to advance the gospel in every way possible, but we got to realize we're not the answer. And the same thing for the church planner. He's got to realize he's not the answer either.
Correct.
Same deal, and that's one of the main things that allowed me to accept what you were doing, is that you didn't come from the big city and say, I'm here to show you people how to do church. You know, it wasn't like that. It was a humility. We want to play our part in this vineyard, you know, and you weren't coming to show us how to do it either.
Yeah.
And that was a big piece. If I had a piece of advice to any church planter wanted to partner with someone or wanted to be accepted and endorsed and encouraged, I'd say come in humble, wanting to play your part, but knowing that, you know, that you're not the answer either.
Right.
And that's a humility that if you can get it early on, it's a lot better than having to earn it over time.
Yeah. Well, you didn't know me at the time I was earning it.
Yeah.
We talk about in a local church how there's lots of parts to the body, but we forget very easily that in the same way in the capital C church, there's lots of churches that are part of the body.
Yeah.
And Trinity, Mission Church, and other churches, as long as we're focusing and helping each other really stay true to the gospel, then we can see each other. So you're a part, you're a member of the body of Christ, and you do your part, and I'll do my part, and we'll work together.
You know, every pastor that I know, and mostly I know myself the best, has insecurity about their mission and what could happen if someone else comes to town, and who's going to be the latest and greatest, and you know, everybody has to wrestle with that. I don't know anybody who doesn't. If they do, I'm not sure I believe them.
That's exactly right.
You know, but you know, you wrestle with that. And I remember having a conversation with Brian one time that just basically said, hey, you know what, there's probably going to be some exchange of people. I don't remember talking about this, you know, and we just need to be open about it, and you know, sometimes talk about whether it's a healthy exchange or not a healthy exchange. Yeah. You know, because I recognize there are some people that that aren't here, that I wish were here, but probably belong where you're at with you, and we've kind of lost them, and I've wanted to lose them to you, you know, honestly. And you do wrestle with that, but on the other hand, if they're going to grow better at your church, then the goal is making disciples, not keeping them. And if for whatever reason they're going to connect with you or what you're doing better, or it's a better place for them to grow, I mean, that's the end game. And you just got to keep that end game in mind and keep your insecurities in check, and really desire the growth of disciples and the advance of the gospel over other things.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I think was an early conversation, just because it's just right out there. And I think one of the hallmarks of our relationship has just been we just were going to talk about that and not be afraid of those topics. And that's been a real comfort, just to be able to say, hey, what do you think? What should we do if
yeah, right.
somebody crosses over? How do you want to handle that and talk that through for their best, for the kingdom's best? The reality has been that there really hasn't, you know, and this is often the case. The fear is much bigger than the reality. Yeah. If there is a fear of losing people, it's usually not the case, because you know, we're talking about a very same church, same gospel, same Savior, but a very different flavor profile, if you will. And it doesn't take much for people to be like, oh, well, you know, I really liked the big kids program that Trinity had. You don't have that. And I tell them no, and we won't for a while. Yeah. So it's enough to be like, there's really not a big crossover. And I would really encourage pastors of more established churches, as plants come into town and they interact with them, to let go of some of those fears for a number of reasons. Number one, of course, which is these aren't your people. This isn't, you don't own the church. Yeah. But also there probably isn't going to be as much, you know, sheep wandering as you fear. That may be a false notion that, you know, you don't need to be worried about at all. And I think that your posture and Trinity's posture with that whole thing has both given the people of Trinity permission to explore that possibility and think about that, pray about it, and that freedom reduces the exodus factor. Because people then feel like, oh, well, we're allowed to pray about it and think about it without any guilt. Don't really want to. Don't really want to do that. Don't really want to go there. So just that openness, I think, just quelled that storm. If there was ever going to be one, I think just stopped that before it could have even started. Yeah.
The main picture for me, biblically speaking, has been the idea of harvest hands praying for workers in the harvest, and you know, it is a, you know, vineyard imagery and wheat imagery here. You know, you think of it as just a vast, think of all these rolling hills of vineyards that you're just never going to get to all by yourself. And the sun is setting and you're tired, and the crew you've been working with, they've been working hard, and you still got rows and rows and rows of harvest still to get to. And the fact that someone would come and say, hey, can we give you a hand with that? Well, who would turn that down? That doesn't make any sense. So that biblical picture for us has been kind of how I think about it. And it's been a natural, because you look around and you see it happening, you know, literally.
Right.
You know, and so it's happening gospel-wise as well.
I can't say that I've got it as good of a biblical picture and analogy, so good job, Pastor.
Hey, that's right.
There is a tremendous and beautiful amount of parallel between the wine industry and the gospel ministry that I have just thoroughly enjoyed, and talking with and getting to know a lot of winemakers and winery owners. A lot of them say, you don't make any, there's nothing to be had for 5 years. 5 years, and then you'll know. And that's church planting. You don't know what you've got for years. It's not just how you doing in 6 months.
Interesting, yeah.
And there's just a matter of why has Walla Walla gone from maybe less than 20 wineries 15 years ago to now over 100 plus wineries, maybe 150, is not because everybody's trying to be the best, but because the market wants variety, and you know, it's one of those things that is a taste driven or a preference driven, and some things just connect really well with other people. And so you can't really find the best winery. You just have to say, what's your favorite winery, or what are 3 of your favorites? And that's what I tell people, even about ministry here. I would never say we're the best church in town. I said, I want to be a good church, but I can give you 5 churches that I say, no, they're also really good. And if you don't connect here, you should go check them out, because that's what the gospel is about now.